He was born when his very existence was a crime. A black mother, a white father, in a country where their love could get them jailed, or worse. As a child, he couldn't walk next to his dad in public, couldn't call his mom mom outside their home. Every day he hid in the shadows of a divided world, just to survive being himself. But from the streets of apartheid South Africa rose a boy who turned pain into laughter and silence into a global voice. This is the unbelievable true story of Trevor Noah, the boy who was literally born a crime. In 1984, under the burning South African sun, a crime was committed, not with a weapon, but with love. Patricia Nombuyiselo Noah, a fiercely independent Xhosa woman, chose to love a man she wasn't allowed to love. Robert, a quiet, white Swiss-German man living in Johannesburg, was her friend, her partner, and, by the cruel logic of apartheid, her accomplice. Together they conceived a child, an act punishable by 5 years in prison. That child was Trevor Noah. When he was born, the law said his very skin tone was evidence of a crime. Apartheid was a system designed to control, to categorize, to separate. People were labeled white, black, colored, or Indian, and every right, where you could live, work, go to school, whom you could love, depended on that label. But Trevor didn't fit into any box. He was half black, half white, illegal, invisible, and unwanted by the system that ruled his country. The secret child Patricia hid her pregnancy as long as she could. She refused to tell her church, her neighbors, even her family. Giving birth to a mixed-race baby could have meant arrest, beatings, or the child being taken away. When Trevor was born, she chose a small private hospital that sometimes looked the other way, run by a network of sympathetic nurses who quietly helped mothers like her. She named him Trevor, an English name, neutral and simple. He would need that. From his first breath, his existence depended on blending in and staying unnoticed. Growing up, Trevor wasn't allowed to walk outside with his mother. If the police saw them together, they'd ask questions. So in public, his mother pretended to be the maid. If they walked past a white man, especially a police officer, she'd drop his hand and walk a few steps ahead, her body tense, her voice low. Trevor didn't understand then, but his life was a game of survival, played in silence. Sometimes his father would visit. Patricia and Robert couldn't go anywhere together, so they met in secret apartments or quiet parks. Trevor would play while his parents sat apart on opposite benches, pretending not to know each other. When the police came near, Robert would turn away, pretending to be a stranger. Trevor once asked his mother why he couldn't call his dad Dad in public. Patricia smiled sadly and said, "Because love is a luxury our color can't afford out there." Patricia was a rebel long before Trevor was born. She had run away from her rural village to the city, defying tradition and her family. She learned secretarial work and insisted on living independently, a rarity for black women in apartheid South Africa. She didn't believe in staying silent. When her boss told her, "Women like you should be at home," she shot back, "Then who's going to type your letters?" She was stubborn, spiritual, and fearless. Her faith wasn't gentle, it was defiant. She took Trevor to 3 churches every Sunday. One for prayer, one for singing, one for preaching. Trevor once joked that church wasn't just religion. It was his mother's form of resistance. "Church," she said, "is where I talk to the only man they can't arrest, God." In the neighborhood, Trevor's lighter skin made him a mystery. Black kids thought he was white. White people thought he was colored. Colored kids said he talked funny. He belonged everywhere and nowhere. He spoke multiple languages, Xhosa, Zulu, Tswana, Afrikaans, and English, switching tongues like a chameleon. His mother told him, "If they can't see you, make them understand you." That advice became his weapon. Humor and language were how he survived. At home, Patricia didn't let him use excuses. She believed education was the key to freedom. Even when money was short, she bought him books and forced him to read aloud from the Bible every night. "If you can understand this," she'd say, "you can understand the world." They lived in small apartments and sometimes in dangerous townships, surrounded by violence and poverty. But Patricia made sure her son saw the world differently. When other kids saw only what they lacked, she taught Trevor to see what he could create. Apartheid wasn't just a system of laws, it was a machine of control. Black South Africans needed passes to enter white areas, curfews were enforced, and neighborhoods were physically divided by race. Trevor learned early that even geography had color. White neighborhoods had paved roads and clean parks. Black townships had mud, dust, and broken dreams. Once, Patricia took Trevor on a minibus into a white suburb. The driver stared at them. "What's this white child doing with you?" he asked. Patricia smiled and said, "He's not white. He's light-skinned, like Jesus." Everyone laughed. The laughter saved them from suspicion that day. But not every encounter ended that way. Once, a police officer stopped them and demanded to know who Trevor belonged to. Patricia pointed to a black woman walking by and said, "He's hers." When the officer turned his head, she grabbed Trevor's hand and ran. That was Trevor's childhood. Part comedy, part chase scene. All survival. The invisible father, Robert, was never absent out of neglect. He was absent out of fear. If he was seen too often with Trevor, it could bring danger to both of them. Yet behind closed doors, he was gentle and patient. He taught Trevor about the world, about honesty, about thinking for himself. He never raised his voice, never hit him, never treated him like a secret. He cooked, he told stories, and he treated Patricia with quiet respect. Years later, when apartheid ended, Trevor went looking for him again. No phone number, no address, just a memory. When they reunited, Robert was proud. He had followed Trevor's rise on TV. He said simply, "I always knew you'd make people laugh." But as a child, Trevor didn't understand that absence could be love. 2. By the late 1980s, South Africa was changing. Protests filled the streets. Nelson Mandela's name was whispered like a prayer. Trevor was just a boy, but he could feel the tension. Soldiers marching through the townships. Smoke rising in the distance, his mother whispering, "Stay inside." In those years, Patricia worked 2 jobs to feed him. She walked miles when buses refused black passengers. She prayed loud and laughed louder. Her faith wasn't naive, it was her armor. She told Trevor, "You were born wrong by their laws, but right by God's plan." He didn't know what that meant then. But those words stayed with him. Even as a child, Trevor used humor like a shield. When bullies mocked his skin, he made jokes until they laughed with him instead of at him. When adults asked uncomfortable questions, he made them laugh before they could accuse. He imitated accents, mimicked radio hosts, and told stories in the street. His mother called it talking too much. But she also saw how his words changed people. "God gave you a tongue for a reason," she said. "Use it wisely." That gift, language, observation, timing, would become the foundation of his future. End of setup. By the time Trevor reached his teenage years, apartheid was collapsing. Nelson Mandela was freed. A new South Africa was being born, one that promised equality, though not everyone believed in it yet. But freedom came with chaos. The walls that kept people apart also kept violence in check. When they fell, old wounds reopened. Poverty deepened. Crime rose. And amid that turbulence, Patricia married again, to a man named Abel, and the next chapter of Trevor's life would test everything she had taught him about strength, love, and survival. When apartheid fell in the early 1990s, South Africa celebrated. People danced in the streets, chanted Mandela's name, waved the new flag. Freedom at last. But for many, that freedom came with uncertainty. The system that once controlled every part of their lives was gone. But it left behind chaos, unemployment, and anger. For Trevor and his mother, it meant moving from one hardship into another. Patricia married a mechanic named Abel, a tall, charming man with strong hands and an easy laugh. At first, he seemed good. He treated Patricia with affection, joked with Trevor, and worked hard. They opened a small repair shop together, fixing old cars and selling parts. But Abel changed. Alcohol turned his charm into cruelty. His jealousy grew whenever Patricia succeeded. He believed a man should control his home, and Patricia refused to be controlled. Trevor heard the fights through the walls, shouting, doors slamming, glass breaking. He'd run to his mother's room, but she always stood tall afterward, even with bruises. "Don't worry, my boy," she'd say. "No man can break a woman who walks with God. Still, Fear crept into their lives. Abel's temper became a constant shadow. Trevor attended mixed-race schools after apartheid ended, places that were supposed to be equal, but old divisions still ran deep. White kids looked down on black ones. Black kids mocked colored kids. And Trevor, who was both and neither, floated between groups. He didn't belong anywhere, so he learned to belong everywhere. He became a translator, a mimic, a comedian. He could switch languages and accents instantly, Zulu with one friend, Afrikaans with another, English with the teachers. In the playground, laughter was his armor. If he made them laugh first, they couldn't hate him. At home, though, life wasn't funny. Patricia's job paid little. Abel drank more. Sometimes there was no electricity, sometimes no food. But Patricia never let Trevor feel poor. She'd say, "We are rich in stories, not in coins." She taught him how to read bills, fix broken things, and pray with faith that sounded like defiance. On Sundays, she dragged him to church again, still 3 times, still with joy. "God is my husband," she said once. "The rest are just men." As a teenager, Trevor discovered a different education, the one the streets gave. He sold pirated CDs, DJ'd at parties, and fixed old computers to make money. His hustle wasn't about greed, it was about survival. He and his best friend, Teddy, learned to make small profits from chaos, selling chocolate bars at school, trading cassette tapes, running errands for people. But every venture reminded Trevor how race shaped opportunity. When white kids sold things, it was called entrepreneurship. When he did it, teachers called it suspicious. He started DJing at township parties, where music was a language that united everyone, black, white, colored, poor, rich. Behind his turntables, Trevor felt free. Nobody cared about color when the beat dropped. He began to see comedy in everything, the absurdity of laws, the contradictions of freedom, the way people clung to old hate while preaching new equality. He didn't know it yet, but he was building the voice that would one day carry him across the world. Patricia never stopped pushing him forward. She sent him to good schools, even when she couldn't afford it. When he wanted to quit, she refused. "You can't fail because you're poor," she said. That's lazy thinking. Trevor sometimes hated her strictness, her curfews, her prayers, her punishments, but he also admired her bravery. She walked through dangerous neighborhoods without fear, confronted drunk men on the street, and always came home with a story. Once, a group of men tried to rob their minibus. Patricia shouted Bible verses at them until they backed off, confused. Trevor laughed nervously afterward, but his mother said calmly, "The devil fears faith more than fists." For every hardship, Patricia answered with humor and belief. Trevor inherited both. Post-apartheid South Africa was a nation reborn, but not healed. In the townships, unemployment soared. Crime became normal. Trevor saw friends disappear into gangs or prison. One day, police raided his neighborhood. Trevor ran, terrified. His crime? Selling copied CDs. They arrested him anyway, and he spent a night in jail. It was cold, filthy, full of fear, and a lesson he never forgot. The color of your skin could still decide whether you were forgiven or forgotten. When Patricia bailed him out, she didn't scold him. She looked him in the eye and said, "Now you know how easy it is to lose your freedom. Never give it away again." That moment stayed carved in his mind. By his late teens, Trevor was known locally as DJ Tira or DJ Danger. He performed at school events and clubs, spinning music and cracking jokes between songs. His charisma filled rooms. People who once ignored him now gathered around him. He noticed something powerful. When people laughed together, their walls fell. Laughter was a weapon stronger than anger. At home, Abel's violence worsened. He beat Patricia often. Trevor tried to intervene, but Abel was stronger. The boy who once hid from the police now faced a different terror inside his own home. Patricia refused to leave. "He's sick," she said, "but God will deal with him." Trevor begged her to go. "Faith doesn't mean staying in pain," he said. But she wouldn't listen. Her love for family and her belief in redemption kept her there. One night, Abel hit her so badly she fled with Trevor to her mother's house. They stayed away for months. Patricia found work, saved money, rebuilt. Then, for reasons even Trevor couldn't understand, she went back. "He promised to change," she said. "People can change." Trevor didn't believe it. But he couldn't stop her. By the time Trevor finished school, he was searching for purpose. He didn't have connections or money for university. The job market was brutal, so he returned to what he knew: humor, language, hustle. He performed at small comedy clubs, telling stories about growing up mixed race, about his mother, about the absurd rules of apartheid. People laughed, not because his life was funny, but because he made pain feel human. He realized he had something rare: perspective. He could see the world through every color's eyes. At the same time, Abel's rage reached its breaking point. He drank constantly, lost jobs, blamed Patricia for his failures. Trevor moved out, but his mother stayed, praying for peace in a house filled with fear. Trevor's youth was a contradiction: freedom mixed with fear, laughter built from pain. He had seen the worst of humanity and still found reasons to laugh. But his greatest test was still ahead. One day, Abel would do something that changed all their lives forever, and from that moment, Trevor would finally understand the meaning of his mother's faith and the price of survival. The air in their home grew thick with tension. Years of fear, of bruises hidden under sleeves, of silent prayers whispered behind locked doors, had turned into something sharp, something ready to break. Patricia still smiled in public, still went to church, still raised her younger sons, Andrew and Isaac, with love. But in private, the storm never stopped. Abel drank more, shouted louder, broke things faster, and Trevor, now a young man, watched helplessly as his mother's hope clashed with his stepfather's rage. He had moved out, but his mind never left that house. Every time the phone rang late at night, his heart jumped. One evening, Patricia finally left. After years of trying, years of forgiveness, she took her children and disappeared. She found a small apartment in another neighborhood and started over. It wasn't easy. Money was tight, fear was constant, but she was free. Trevor helped when he could, now earning a small living from stand-up comedy and radio gigs. He was just starting to rise, just starting to see light after a lifetime of darkness. Then Abel found them. He called her again and again. He begged, he threatened, he promised to change. Patricia refused to answer. She was done being afraid, but monsters rarely let go quietly. One Sunday morning, Patricia drove to church with her sons. She was radiant in her blue dress, Bible in hand, singing as she drove. Freedom suited her. When they returned home, Abel was waiting outside, drunk, shaking, his eyes full of fury. Trevor wasn't there that day. He would later wish he had been. Abel shouted that she had humiliated him, that she had destroyed his life. Patricia stood firm, holding her Bible like a shield. "You cannot kill me, Abel," she said. "If God is with me, who can be against me?" But rage had already drowned reason. Abel raised his gun and fired. The first shot hit Patricia in the leg. She fell, but she didn't cry. She crawled toward her sons, trying to shield them. The second shot tore through her back, exited through her shoulder, and missed her spine by millimeters. Abel pointed the gun again, to her head this time. He fired. The gun jammed. He fled, thinking she was dead. Neighbors called the police. Trevor was called from work, his voice breaking as he heard the words, "Your mother's been shot." He drove to the hospital shaking, his thoughts a blur. He had imagined this day for years, but nothing prepared him for it. When Trevor arrived, he saw his mother alive. Barely, but alive. The doctor said the bullet had passed through her skull and missed her brain entirely. It was, they said, a miracle. Trevor stood by her bed, holding her hand, trying to find words. Patricia looked at him, weak but smiling. "Don't worry, my boy," she whispered. "God is not finished with me yet." Tears ran down his face. He wanted to hate Abel, to find him, to make him pay. But Patricia stopped him. She said, "If I hate him, I give him power. I refuse to live my life as a victim." That sentence changed Trevor's soul. Justice that never came. Abel was arrested, but only briefly. The South African legal system, still struggling with corruption and inefficiency, treated domestic violence like a private matter. He was released. Trevor couldn't believe it. His mother had nearly died, and the man who tried to kill her walked free. He said later, "That's when I learned that freedom doesn't always mean justice." Patricia went back to work, limping at first, but full of faith. She forgave Abel publicly, telling people, "God spared my life for a reason." Trevor didn't understand how she could forgive. He wanted anger, revenge. She wanted peace. That contrast, the fire in him and the grace in her, became the core of who he was. In the months after the shooting, Trevor's life transformed. He poured everything he had, fear, pain, confusion, into comedy. On stage, he told stories about race, language, love, and his mother. People laughed and cried in the same breath. His humor was not an escape. It was rebellion. He was exposing absurdities that others ignored, making people confront pain through laughter. Comedy became his therapy, his protest, his purpose. He started performing in bigger venues, clubs, festivals, then TV. People noticed. His jokes weren't just funny. They were insightful. He wasn't mocking his country. He was healing it, one laugh at a time. Every time he stepped on stage, he carried his mother's courage with him. Every punchline was a prayer. Patricia recovered slowly. Her limp stayed, but her spirit only grew stronger. She remarried a kind man, built a peaceful home, and continued to inspire her children. Trevor often said she was the funniest person he'd ever met, and the bravest. She taught him that laughter was not denial, but defiance. That faith was not weakness, but strength. One evening, after a performance, Trevor called her. "Mom," he said, "you're the reason I can stand in front of people and make them laugh." She chuckled softly. "Then you're doing what I prayed for," she said. "You're showing them that no man and no system can stop what God has planned." The bullet that was meant to end Patricia's life had done something else instead. It ended their fear. Trevor no longer hid from his past. He no longer felt shame about being born a crime. He realized he was born a survivor, a storyteller, and a voice for those who had none. His mother's survival became the symbol of his own rebirth. He once said, "My mother showed me what real power looks like. It's not violence. It's forgiveness." The night his mother was shot changed Trevor Noah forever. It stripped away whatever illusions he had about safety, family, or fairness. He had lived his whole life balancing between worlds, between races, between laughter and fear. But now, something inside him crystallized. He understood his mission, to tell the truth and to make people listen, even when the truth was wrapped in laughter. The power of a voice. After his mother's recovery, Trevor returned to work with a new intensity. He took every gig he could find, small comedy clubs, dingy bars, college shows, corporate events where nobody laughed. He bombed countless times, but he learned. His stories about growing up half white, half black, but fully confused, struck a chord. He talked about his mother's faith, about the absurdity of apartheid laws, about police chases, languages, and love. What made him special wasn't just humor, it was empathy. He could laugh at pain without disrespecting it. He could turn tragedy into understanding. As his popularity grew, TV producers started noticing him. He appeared on South African shows like The Pure Monity Show and Isidingo. People laughed, but they also listened. His jokes weren't just funny, they healed. Trevor once said in an interview, "Comedy is my way of making sense of the world that never made sense to me." A new South Africa. A new Trevor by the mid-2000s. South Africa was finding its footing as a democracy. The old wounds of apartheid were still open, but a new generation was daring to dream. Trevor's comedy spoke to them, the youth who were free but still haunted by history. He performed in Zulu, Afrikaans, English, sometimes switching languages mid-joke. His multiculturalism became his superpower. He wasn't just a comedian. He was a reflection of the country's chaos and beauty. Yet fame brought its own struggles. Trevor faced criticism from all sides. Some white audiences thought he was too political, while some black audiences thought he was too soft. But he refused to pick a side. He said, "I don't belong to one tribe. I belong to all of them." It was the same survival skill his mother had taught him. Adapt, but never lose yourself. Crossing oceans, Trevor's talent couldn't stay confined to South Africa. He started touring internationally, first in the UK, then in the US. His accent, his energy, his stories, they fascinated audiences everywhere. He didn't tell African jokes. He told human ones, about mothers, fear, hope, love, universal emotions through the lens of race and survival. In 2011, he appeared on The Tonight Show with Jay Leno, the first South African comedian ever to do so. Then came The Late Show with David Letterman. His rise was meteoric, but behind the stage lights, he carried the same memory, a mother who once told him, "You were born wrong by their laws, but right by God's plan." Every laugh he earned felt like a small victory over the system that once tried to erase him. The call that changed everything in 2015. Trevor received a call that would change his career forever. Comedy Central wanted him to take over The Daily Show, replacing Jon Stewart, one of the most respected comedians in the world. The world was stunned. Critics doubted him. "Who is Trevor Noah?" they asked. "Can a South African kid handle America's politics?" Trevor didn't respond with anger. He smiled, as he always did, and said, "I've been the outsider my whole life. I know how to find my place." When he stepped onto that stage for the first time, the boy who once couldn't walk beside his mother in public now stood before millions, unafraid, unapologetic, and fully seen, full circle, as his fame grew. Trevor wrote his memoir, Born a Crime. It wasn't just a story. It was a love letter to his mother, to the country that both broke and built him, and to every child who ever felt invisible. The book became an international bestseller. Readers cried, laughed, and learned. Schools began teaching it. Teachers called it the bridge between history and humanity. When Patricia read the book, she laughed. "You made me sound crazy," she said. Trevor smiled. "You are crazy, Mom, but you're also the reason I'm alive." Their bond, forged in fear and faith, remained unshakable. She still teased him about going to church. "Don't forget where your jokes came from," she'd say. He'd answer, "From you, obviously." The legacy of Patricia Noah Patricia became something of a legend herself. People admired her strength, her faith, her ability to forgive the man who nearly killed her. She once said in an interview, "I survived because God had a plan. I raised a child who could speak for those who couldn't." Her forgiveness was never weakness. It was defiance. She didn't forgive Abel to free him. She forgave him to free herself. Trevor understood that now. Every stage he stood on, every joke he told, was a continuation of her story. A story of resilience that refused to bow to hate. Through all his success, television, tours, awards, Trevor remained grounded. He often said, "My story is not extraordinary. My mother's story is." He used his platform to talk about race, equality, and the power of empathy. He reminded the world that humor isn't about mocking pain. It's about surviving it. In one of his interviews, he said, "When you grow up mixed in a world built on separation, you learn to see everyone as human." That's the greatest lesson my mother gave me, to see people, not labels. The man the system couldn't define looking back, Trevor's journey feels impossible. Born an illegal child in apartheid South Africa, raised by a single mother who risked everything, shot at, beaten by poverty, ignored by society. And yet, he laughed his way through it all. The system called him a crime. But life turned him into a voice. He once said on stage, "They said I wasn't supposed to exist. So I decided to exist loudly," and he did. Sometimes, Trevor visits his mother's home in Johannesburg. It's quiet now, peaceful. Patricia gardens, sings hymns, and tells stories with that same spark in her eyes. Trevor sits beside her, the world-famous comedian, still her mischievous boy. They laugh about the past, the bus rides, the police chases, the broken bones, the miracles. At one point, he asks her, "Mom, do you ever regret anything?" She looks up from her garden, smiles, and says, "Regret? No, my boy. We survived. That's more than enough." Trevor nods. The wind rustles the trees. For the first time in his life, he feels truly at peace. Not because he escaped his past, but because he honored it. He realizes something profound. He wasn't just born a crime. He was born a purpose.